My name is Jake Brookman. I'm the founder and CEO of CoinFund. We are a blockchain-focused investment firm doing crypto for about 9 years this summer. As an investor, I probably like 80% of the things I look at and do is in infrastructure. Really excited to keep doing that for a while, but we are seeing more consumer stuff come along. Today we have a panel on infrastructure and interoperability. I guess mainly infrastructure. We have a very eclectic group of infrastructural projects here. We'll keep it to about 30 minutes. Let's see, time check. 4 o'clock, all right. So let's start by introducing ourselves and a couple of sentences about what your projects do.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Dimitri. I'm co-founder and CEO of Subsquid. I have academic background and broke into crypto in about 2017 at the end. First as the independent researcher and then developing a data-heavy consensus algorithm for IoTs. And since 2020, I've been building the next-gen modular indexing protocol called Subsquid. With the idea is that the data should really be extracted from a specialized data lake rather than from an RPC node, as was like before, for example, by the graph.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us here. My name is Paul. I'm one of the co-founders of DIA, and I'm in charge of business development at DIA. We founded DIA in 2018, so right before a bear market. We had enough time then to build out what DIA is today. We felt that back in 2018 and still today, oracles disregard that we are having a multitude of different ecosystems, and you can't just treat them all as one. And yeah, I think we're more being validated right now with the emergence of so many different chains and how we as infrastructure need to keep up and help them fulfill whatever they want to achieve.
Hey everyone, I'm Dominic. I'm the head of ecosystem at Li.Fi. Li.Fi is a DeFi liquidity aggregator. So basically we, for the most part, try to aggregate all on-chain liquidity as well as cross-chain liquidity. So mostly bridges, DEXs, DEX aggregators, and solvers. And we package that into an API, an SDK, and a widget. Mostly Li.Fi itself is a B2B business selling to wallets, protocols, also a lot of like people coming from Web 2 into crypto, and they just want to tap into on-chain liquidity in a seamless way. And then we also have Jumper.exchange, which some of you might know, which is more like our DeFi native interface for all the degens that need to find the next chain that they're gonna ape into the newest meme coin.
Awesome, welcome guys, thank you. So let's start with like a little bit of maybe vision or theory about infra. It feels like we've been building infra forever and everyone just keeps building infra. So if like the launch of Bitcoin, you know, in 2009 is the start state and the end state is total global adoption of digital assets and crypto and blockchains and decentralization technology, where are we right now? Like what is your sort of feeling around kind of like the state of infra? And how much longer do we have to go before we can finally start, you know, achieving mainstream traction?
All right, yeah, that's more of a philosophical question, I guess, right? So I believe that this thing always comes in waves, in the sense that the breakthrough projects try to build on the edge of the existing ecosystem, of the existing infrastructure. It's not like you build something ready to go and then you get a completely new product, right? So for example, YouTube wasn't really built on the existing APIs or indexers. It was really built on the edge of what was possible back then. So basically pushing the limits on the infra. It is more like of a feedback loop. So when it comes to our philosophy at Subsquid is that we really try to focus on a simple thing, but do it like really well. In particular, we want to provide very fast and efficient access to the raw data, very close to how it is stored in blockchain, and then provide the best tooling to work with this data, basically to decode it, transform it, and put it. And the idea is very simple, is that developers should have maximal flexibility to express like their ideas and build things that are really on the edge. And we should really solve only like the very simple, so to speak, problems. And in this case, it's just access to the data the way it is. And this is a completely different approach to other indexers who try to kind of predict what kind of things people would need to build on. So for example, I will give you like NFT collections across this, and this network. Okay, that would be fine, but like you would probably build like another NFT marketplace on top of it, but it's not really an interesting thing. An interesting thing will be built on something that relies on like very simple and fundamental building blocks instead, rather than just like something ready to go.
Yeah, I think we all wonder if infrastructure is defining the limitations of what can be possible, and infrastructure is not as far developed as it should be to have all these relevant use cases. I guess UX and other things are also contributing to this. So when we look what we've seen in the last years and what crypto enabled, I think that was limited, and infrastructure was also like in a nascent state, and with different providers breaking down problems. And I think, yeah, Dimitri, as you said, like focusing very much on one core competence. I think this is generally then driving the ability of making much more sophisticated and complex products, which ultimately can benefit an end user. So I think now there are a lot of things we're seeing, like components which can be utilized, like looking at ZK proving things, looking at IoT devices and other mechanisms of encrypting data. I think bringing this all together, I think infrastructure is then not the limitation anymore, but based on these different components, I think I'm pretty positive that we'll see in the next 12, 24 months super exciting use cases which go well beyond DeFi. And nothing against DeFi, obviously. I mean, we're providing oracles, so it's pretty close to our heart, but it's also exciting to see that this goes well beyond the traditional use cases we've seen in Web3. And obviously, we're trying to contribute to understand what are still the limitations oracles might provide in a journey for people to build something, and focusing on breaking these down.
Yeah, I think we're actually at a pivotal moment in terms of like scalability versus infrastructure, where for the first time in the blockchain's history, or the scalability problem has actually made so many strides that now scalability isn't the issue anymore. There's more than enough block space, cheap block space available. Almost all former layer 1 chains have or are in the process of converting to EVM or adding EVM layers on top. So a lot of the existing infrastructure that we have built can be deployed on these layers. And now we have, 100, 200, whatever new environments that are going live, that have specific things they are looking to solve. But what they maybe don't see yet is that the infrastructure that they're going to need to actually build these use cases isn't able to keep up with that chain expansion, right? So, because I'm handling the ecosystem as expansion and just generally chains at Li.Fi, I'm the one who's having all these conversations with all these people, and they all come to me and they're like, hey, my new chain is super cool. Like, can you add support for us? And I'm like, yeah, I can do that when you have this and do this and do this and do this. And I don't think all these new chains or the people working in their growth or their BD have fully realized yet the amount of infra that they're going to have to onboard onto this chain to make it actually work for developers.
And probably they shouldn't, right? I mean, I don't know.
I mean, they shouldn't, but like we don't have services yet that allow them to, get to this level of abstraction or just have that all out of the box. Right? There's obviously people trying to solve this problem, like roll-up as a services and stuff like that. And you know, you guys try to work with them. We try to work with them. It's a little bit more complicated for us because we aggregate other infrastructure, but it's definitely not yet there where it should be. Maybe in terms of data or oracles, it's a bit easier. But we aggregate liquidity, so that means, you know, the train tracks need to be built, which is the data layer that connects these chains, and then somebody needs to have the trains, which is the liquidity, and then Li.Fi is kind of the layer on top of that that makes the plans for how these trains go from A to B, right? And building that stack, it's kind of like, you could actually compare it in terms of like saying pivotal moment to the US trying to build their railway system, you know? It's a very similar kind of point in time.
It's pretty pessimistic, huh?
So each one of your projects is kind of speaking to working with multiple chains. And I want to ask you another kind of vision question, because, you know, 10 years ago in this industry, there was a very large, I would say predominant group of people who made the argument like, well, we're only going to need one chain, right? And that's Bitcoin. And then for a long time, you know, if you talk to investors, investors had this sort of power law view of blockchains, which is, you know, 2 or 3 or 4 blockchains will win, and then there's going to be a long tail. And then at this conference, I met a young man who said there's going to be 1 million roll-ups by the end of 2024, right? So those are like dramatically different views of the core infrastructure of blockchain, the blockchains themselves. And you guys are all obviously operating across many blockchains. So what is your view in 2024? Like, is it 1 blockchain, 5 blockchains, 1 million blockchains, 1 trillion blockchains, no blockchains?
Many, I would say.
Many.
Many, but probably
Hundreds.
not thousands, maybe.
Thousands, okay.
If you like aggregate across everything. But I think one can also ask about the total amount of data that the thing produces, right? Because there are lots of zombie chains with basically like no activity whatsoever. But still, if you aggregate across like all the things that happening, you are we are speaking about terabytes probably of data generated, and one inevitably needs to have like a good handle about this data, which basically means that you have to put this data together like in a single layer so that you can pull this, aggregate, join, because applications also become spread between different rollups, and you need to have a unified view of the state, right, in order to kind of reason about this. So yeah, my another point is that, for example, if you look at this kind of breakthrough applications like Farcaster, it is clear that they escape the blockchain space really, because they have on-chain data, they have off-chain data, and when it comes to indexing and reasoning about the application state, it no longer can be limited to like the blockchain space really. So at the end of the day, yeah, it boils down to a very simple observation that if you want to have composability at the application level across the smart contracts on different chains, you really also need to have composability at the data layer. And that's inevitably brings you to this idea that you have like this ocean of data, like a global data lake where all this data sits together. Otherwise, it's just impossible to join it.
I really like the 1 million forecast because I think this complexity which it will bring is a good. I mean, it's good for us as infrastructure providers because it's going to challenge us, and we are becoming more and more relevant to somehow unite those. I mean, being the data or transferring assets or providing a differentiated perspective on prices based on the liquidity in these ecosystems. And I don't know, it's probably not 1 million, but the better we become in equipping and productizing the deployment of these roll-up chains, I think the more we'll see. So if this becomes so seamless that like everybody can just spin those up in a couple of hours, then I think it's just a completely different primitive how we used to look. Okay, that's a chain, it's completely independent. So I think will be us and many others who are just going to provide the tooling around that to keep like catching up to this growing, not perfectly connected ecosystem. So yeah, I bet there'll be a lot, and we're kind of happy about it and trying to bring some transparency into the mess.
Yeah, I mean, it's also like you said, ghost chains, right? Like, why are these ghost chains? First of all, because nobody had conviction that they're actually going to be kind of the end game. But then also because they're kind of like, if we stay in that analogy of like the railway network, there's some tiny town in Kansas that just nobody can get to, right? Because there's just no connection there. Like, and the majority of the users is not going to be willing to like figure out like how to get to these chains. And I hope that finally with these layer 2s and 3s, we be at the end game, because like we've been doing a lot of like going around from A to B to Z, and like to the incentives of, you know, tokenization. We've been like building things here and there, and then they have been, you know, growing and then dying again. But I hope finally with the state that we're in right now, I still think there's going to be many chains, and not just many chains. There's going to be like archipelagos of chains, like, you know, the Optimism super chain, and then Polygon CDK chains, and all of them will be through ZK Tech or whatever. They will be vertically integrated, and they will have seamless interoperability between each other. But what's most interesting for us, because like that's what sometimes what we get asked, like, isn't that going to make Li.Fi obsolete? And we're like, no, because there's going to be like 10, 20, 30 of these ecosystems, and they still need to all interop with each other, and that's not seamless. So the complexity is just going to keep on increasing and not decreasing, and our whole thing is abstracting complexity. So, but I hope that something like Farcaster can finally stay on base and maybe have some layer 3 chains if they need to scale on that. But this is how we get, because you asked how do we get to like consumer applications and the end game and building stuff that's actually going to be valuable in the real world, is we get to actually building for the user, and we not just build for the infrastructure anymore. And you know, Farcaster can keep building on base and actually focused on the product vision and not so much anymore on the infrastructure vision.
Awesome. So Dominic, let me ask you about Li.Fi. So Li.Fi is essentially an API that aggregates, you know, all DeFi trading. Tell us about like who's the customer of that? Like, is that a centralized API? Is it a decentralized API? Who's the customer of that? What are you seeing? And what do you project like for the next 5 years of who's going to be, what kind of business you're going to be doing with these guys?
Yeah, so the API itself is centralized, right? Because it would also be really hard to make a scalable decentralized API for this, because we're already getting hammered by bot requests. So like we had to like kind of like API key all our like integration partners, because you know that's just a problem of like an open system when it comes to stuff like this. It's a nice idea, but it just doesn't work in practice. Who are the main customers of this? So we're integrated with 13 out of the top 15 wallets in the game. From like we power Phantom, we power MetaMask, we power the Binance Web3 wallet. 2 days ago, Robinhood announced that we will be powering their Web3 wallet. You know, you name it. And what we do for them is basically power the in-app swapping and bridging function, right? Because doing this and accessing all of this DeFi liquidity is a very, very complex problem. And so at the end of the day, Li.Fi is a classic like software as a service company that operates in a Web3 space, right? I've spoken to a bunch of people here who come up to me and like, hey, we work with Li.Fi, and that's not even like potentially integrations that I even know of, because they just use us as a service because it's convenient for them, right? Because this is not something that you want to do internally. You know, you were like, and that's, I think it's, you guys do something similar. It's like, you don't want to run your own indexes unless you really, really have to, and it's a very specialized use case, and you don't want to like run your own data infrastructure. And in the same way, all these companies, they don't want to, you know, have to reinvent the wheel every time by accessing this liquidity. So in the future, we hope to like onboard more and more Web2 companies as well. You know, everything that's in the, you know, realm of payments. You know, PayPal is looking into like tapping into on-chain liquidity. You know, if we could power that for them, that would be, you know, a massive win for us, obviously. So, and then, but also, on the other hand, like every DeFi application, right? Every DeFi application, you know, if it's a money market, for example, you know, if you want to swap your collateral from one asset into the other asset, you shouldn't have to like, you know, figure that out in a complex way. You should be able to use something like DeFi Saver, for example. They're using us as a router in the back end, basically, to do these kind of transactions. And then we have Jumper.exchange, which is our B2C interface. Moritz actually our CEO for that, which is basically where we service DeFi users directly, right? Kind of like, I always call it kind of like a sky scanner type of thing, where you say you want to go from A to B, and we give you the route that you want, the fastest route, the cheapest route, you name it.
All right, thanks, Dominic. Paul, oracles. What does an oracle project have to do these days to be competitive? And what is the core data that you're serving? And how do you see that changing over time? How does that expand?
Yeah. So I think it's good that the bunch of our peers out there, and throughout time, I think the differentiation has grown, and that's, I guess, reflective of the ecosystem requiring more sophisticated price feeds and not just one global price. So who are our users? It's applications, and who are our customers? It's the L1s and L2s, basically, who require that infrastructure. And we take a bit of a different architectural approach to oracles than our peers, which are using mostly pre-aggregated data. So this means they're going to a data vendor, which has already calculated, let's say, an ETH USD price, and they pull this from this one and a couple of other ones and bring it on-chain to a consensus. We believe that's a nice and elegant and very resilient way to do it. But with this multitude of chains and ecosystems we all just spoke about, I think that's a given. We believe you need to have the metadata around these asset prices and information. So that's why we're integrating into the markets, centralized exchanges, DEXs, pull all the raw data, and then we enable our end users to define logic, how to compute a price feed. So saying, okay, I only want pools on Arbitrum and Linear because they are somehow connected to my ecosystem, and Li.Fi is connected, and liquidations can happen, and I want a price calculated on those. And this additional ability to have the metadata, pool depth, and so on makes a huge differentiator and enables different use cases. So and then our peers, they have other cool products. So luckily we're seeing those growing ecosystems as being used, others. So freedom of choice for whatever you want to build. Oracles, at least for us, I think it's interesting how when we look beyond DeFi, beyond Web3, what can you do with a stack which basically pulls somewhere data and pushes it in a transparent way, saves it, makes it auditable to others. Then you can define logic with what you do with that data and bring it anywhere. So I think we'll see a lot of traditional use cases when you look into finance. It's kind of ridiculous when you imagine how like a benchmark, which is like it's a European thing, I guess, for funds, how they calculate the value of that. It's like a combination of Excel sheets and some like very old code, super buggy, and billions of dollars are basically based on that result. So I think we'll see things which were used in DeFi, spinning out into other dimensions, and these use cases will be supported by infrastructure such as ours.
Dimitri, so in indexing, there have been companies and projects like The Graph that have taken the position like we want to be a very decentralized network, and we want to serve the indexing data in a very decentralized way. There have been other companies that have taken the position like, hey, like we don't care how we index, we just want to create the fastest, best product, and what users really care at the end of the day is the data. And finally, there's been some innovations in indexing as well, for example, around things like storage proofs. So you're not just delivering the data, you're also delivering a proof that this is actually correct on chain. So in that landscape, like where do you guys at Subsquid fall? How do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So there are actually multiple questions in a single one. Okay, so first, starting from the graph. I think the graph was like a really good project in 2020, where we had a single chain and we had relatively simple DeFi applications. And there are two reasons. The first is that you assume that the node that you're connected to always gives you the right data. So basically everything is compliant with the RPC spec, and the amount of data is also like reasonable. So you can put everything into, say, like 10 gigabyte database, and that's enough for your DeFi protocol. Like all the relevant transactions can fit in there. None of this holds anymore because we became multi-chain. We now have Solana with hundreds of terabytes of data, and also with this like thousands, if like not millions, of these chains. Sometimes I call them shit chains because they don't really even verify, like they don't even kind of hold on this like premise that you can verify the block hash. So they don't even care that the state roots actually matches but you still can connect MetaMask for them, like do stuff, get airdrops, degen stuff, but basically the data there is shit. I mean, you cannot really even think that the data that you get from RPC is valid. I mean, breaking the very basic premise, so you actually should fix this data and so on. So getting to the second part of your question, like how we look at this, we really think that the current Oracle model that we have extends to large-scale data sets as well. So essentially, instead of relying on the RPC nodes, we should rely on data providers like DAI, but these data providers should give you the data, not only about the prices, but high-quality, refined data that is then stored in the permanent storage like IPFS and RVF with known hashes, so it is attested. And then this data gets distributed into this decentralized data lake, and then you can query this data, work with this data. So in particular, if you, for example, work with like one of these shit chains, this data is already curated, all these glitches are fixed. Or for example, if you're working with Farcaster, this data set is already prepared, so it's like both off-chain and on-chain. And when we're speaking about off-chain data, we cannot get away without oracles anyway. But at the same time, we really have to rely on the quality of this data. Otherwise, it's just impossible to build anything. So essentially, yeah, our model is that we have high-quality data providers. Currently, it's only Subsquid ourselves who basically guarantees the data through like validation of the nodes where it is possible, through calculating block hashes where possible, producing high-quality trace and state diffs data where possible, providing ZK proofs where possible, basically operating on the best effort basis. And then we provide high-quality infrastructure to query this data with the proof that, assuming that the original data was correct, the query result is also correct. This can be made, you can prove this using ZK or TE or like other things.
Awesome, makes sense. Well, I think we're at the end of our time here, but maybe for the last volley, Dominic, you can say, how do people in this audience engage Li.Fi? Like, who should they be, and what should they do?
Yeah, if you have any, if you have any kind of use case where you need some kind of a smart router that basically allows you to tap into any type of liquidity on chain, cross chain, in the most simplified way for your application, because you're trying to on and offboard something, you need to get into a specific asset. Check us out. And we're currently the provider with the most bridges basically aggregated, and the most DEX aggregators aggregated, and we are adding new ones every month, adding new chains, probably on a week-by-week basis soon. So if you have any needs, let us know. And then if you yourself want to find the best route, go to jumper.exchange and do some swapping. Exactly. Whatever your heart desires.
Paul, what about for Dia?
Yeah, I think we have like this open door policy, so don't feel you're too early or you don't know enough stuff, so just hit us up. I mean, the usual channels, right? Bump us on X, Telegram, all our handles from the team are accessible there. Just ask us and tell us what you need, and we're happy to help. Being it, you guys are building, rolling out a chain, you have a dApp which has specific requirements. We love to help, so yeah, anytime.
Yeah, so in our case, we're mostly speaking to developers and chain developers. So if you want that your data is freely available, then reach out to us and we integrate your chain, usually like within 1-2 days. And if you're a developer who wants to get access to pretty much all the EVM and substrate data for free, also welcome to our docs.subsquid.io. And yeah, I believe this is where all this creativity starts. Build cool stuff.
Awesome. Guys, thank you so much. Dominic, Paul, Dimitri, thanks for giving us your view on infrastructure and your projects.
Thank you.
Thanks.